never been inside, so I wandered around. I said, did you see any police? He said, just a few. And then I asked him why he left, and he said, well, we got bored, and there was nothing else to do, so we came back outside. And he was one of the few who's now milling around with the rest of the protesters. So that's not something that you would expect to hear from someone who was able to come here, breach the entry to the Capitol, wander about at will, and then leave. But of course, as we know anything else about this very disturbing report about one person being shot, we will continue to share that with you. Right now, we're in a standoff. We're waiting to see what happens next. As I mentioned, those additional forces now arriving, but the protesters showing no signs of moving. Judy?
Yes, it is such a disturbing scene. And then, Amna, you see you know the protests that are going on. You see the crowds behind you. But then we just saw two people when you started to speak who were just walking casually behind you, like they were strolling through Washington. We do have a few more pieces of information we want to share. One is CBS is reporting that Kevin McCarthy, who is the highest ranking Republican in the House, he's the House Minority Leader, has phoned President Trump to ask him to do more to get the crowd to step back, to do something to calm the protests. He asked him to speak to the country. At least that is the report that we've been receiving. We're now trying to confirm that ourselves, but we want to share that with you, being reported by CBS. Another news organization reporting that law enforcement is arriving at the Capitol from the Department of Homeland Security. We are also told that both the National Guard and the federal police of other description are heading toward the Capitol. There are clearly moves now to reinforce security at the Capitol. Whatever the planning was that went into today, they underestimated the determination of this crowd to do what it has done, which is to enter the building and to have to work their way through, and to the point that we now know at least one protester was shot. I've just read another report, and I can't tell you the source of it, but the report is that 6 people have been taken to the hospital as a consequence of what we've been watching at the Capitol. And I'm looking to see if I can find the source of that, because we are always reluctant to share information. We have not confirmed that, but I did see a report, 6 people taken to the hospital. We can say the AP is reporting that the National Guard and other federal police are making their way to the Capitol. I've seen a report the Department of Homeland Security was sending its uniformed guards, officials, security to assist at the Capitol. And as I mentioned earlier, Vice President Pence himself has tweeted that this attack on the Capitol will not be tolerated, that protesters will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. In other words, he's going further than President Trump is himself. President Trump has called for calm. He called for people to be peaceful, but this is after hours of basically egging them on, of saying the election was rigged, urging them to have the courage to stand up, to defy the accurate election results. And only in the aftermath of that, and as we just reported, after he was asked by Congressman McCarthy, who's the House Minority Leader, the president was asked to do more, to speak to the American people, to urge these supporters of his to stand down, and we're waiting to see what more he will do. We are waiting to hear from Joe Biden. He was to be talking to the press at 3:30 Eastern Time. That time has come and gone. It's about 20 minutes ago. We're still waiting to see what, if anything, the Vice President, or rather President-elect Biden, will have to say. He may be waiting to see what takes place and whether they are able to calm things down at the Capitol building. So we know, again, efforts are being made underway right now to get more uniformed officers into the Capitol to calm things down. So Lisa Desjardins, you are inside the Capitol complex. Tell us what you've learned at this point. Lisa.
Yeah, you know, right now, a few staffers are starting to venture a little bit out of their offices, go into other offices. There are a few people in the halls, but generally this is what it looks like in the Capitol. just a few people. And, on any other day, any other period of time, this would be completely abnormal. But this is what the Capitol has looked like during the coronavirus. One thing about the timing of this today that has meant fewer people were affected than would have been affected a year ago is that many of the congressional offices have either no staff or very little staff because of the coronavirus. So many of people in the Capitol complex, like so many Americans, are working remotely. The Capitol complex has some 20,000 employees. That's down to a mere fraction these days because of the coronavirus. Now, on the other hand, today was probably the most I've seen of staff in a year, and that's because it's the first week of Congress and it is the Electoral College certification. So fewer staff are here than usual, but more than we've seen during most of the coronavirus. One other note, Judy, I have seen Capitol Police gathering in a stairwell in the building that I am at. They clearly are trying to figure out their next steps. They are organizing. I obviously didn't speak to them. They have a job to do, but I can tell you that they're organizing. They are gathering in their groups here. I don't know what their next step are, but they're clearly trying to figure that out themselves as well.
Lisa Desjardins reporting from the Capitol complex. Lisa's been there for us on the inside as our eyes and ears. Lisa reporting on there are law enforcement trying to get things under control. We know that both the governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam, as I reported a few minutes ago, said he's sending in the National Guard from his state. I now know I can report that from Maryland, the governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan, has said that Maryland is sending in state troopers and National Guard as well to help get the Capitol, get the Washington, D.C., and get the United States Capitol under control, under a safe, to a position where it's safe for people to be there. I just want to share also the New York Times is reporting, Maggie Haberman, who typically covers the White House, is reporting an explosive device was found at the Republican National Committee and detonated safely. So that's another development we will be following today. Danny Weiss, who worked for Speaker Pelosi for several years, you've been at the Capitol, you have decades of experience in the building. You've been talking to folks. What are you learning?
Well, most members seem to be safe. Staff seem to be safe. They're reporting that they're locked down. As Lisa just reported, many of them are working from home. Only staff that were needed for today's procedure were in the Capitol or in the House office buildings. But you know that they're deeply concerned. And this is an institution. Okay, so I've worked there for a long time. It's an institution that has done a lot of good. It's an institution that has done a lot of bad. I personally care about the institution. I know a lot of members do and a lot of staff do. And it's very, very, very disturbing to see the Congress, the buildings, and what it represents, its ability to do good for the country. Certainly it has an ability to do harm, to be under attack like this. And it raises very, very significant questions about how this mood is going to be changed. What I see is that this movement of people that are there today, which they resemble, when you look at them, they resemble the people that gathered in Lansing, Michigan, to try to shut down the state capitol in Lansing. They resemble some of the people that said that they were planning to kidnap, were arrested for planning to kidnap Governor Whitmer. When that happened, President Trump said nothing. And all of the times that people gather, whether it's in Charlottesville or here or elsewhere, and they're never told that this can't go on by the top leadership in this country, they're emboldened to go further. And this is now the furthest step that they have taken to break into the Capitol. Their actions potentially have resulted in the serious wounding or death of somebody inside the building. That is on the President of the United States. And really, I hate to say this, it's on the heads of every Republican that has supported President Trump. I don't say that as a partisan. I say that as someone who has witnessed, and Yamiche mentioned this. She said words have consequences. So those consequences we are now seeing play out. When the president was acquitted for impeachment in the Senate, all bets were off. And we are now really seeing the consequences of that.
Listening to Danny Weiss, who worked at the Capitol for a number of years, was a chief of staff to Nancy Pelosi. We're now hearing and seeing evidence of tear gas or another form of gas that's being used around the Capitol to try to disperse the protesters. We are watching this very closely to see where it's coming from and what happened. This is inside. Now, this is a camera inside, I believe, the Senate chamber. We're looking at this. We were told earlier that protesters were in there. They were rummaging through the desks of different senators. I just want to let you know that as we see this, and this is the Senate chamber, or is that the House chamber? I'm having to get this is the House chamber, my apology. I just want to, I see members of Congress, it looks like sitting in some of these seats. I'm not sure I'm recognizing people. But I do want to report that Speaker Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, who is the ranking Democrat in the Senate Minority Leader, have both called on President Trump to ask his supporters to leave the Capitol grounds. They've called on President Trump to ask his supporters to leave the Capitol grounds. We had reported earlier that Kevin McCarthy, who is the House Minority Leader, Republican, called on President Trump to try to calm the situation, to ask his reporters to stand down. We don't know what effect that had, but now we have the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer, who's the ranking Democrat in the Senate, both asking President Trump to speak to his reporters to urge them to leave the Capitol. So these requests are coming into the president from the Democratic leadership, from the Republican leadership. We have the Vice President of the United States calling on these protesters to stand down, saying they will be prosecuted, he said, to the full extent of the law. My colleague Nick Schifrin, who covers national security, covers the military, the Pentagon, and the State Department for us. Nick, with some information. Nick, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, Judy, over the last hour or so, it's been really back and forth when it comes to the National Guard. D.C. National Guard deploys through the Pentagon, whereas the Virginia and Maryland National Guards would deploy through their governors after being asked. We now have confirmation from the Pentagon that the D.C. National Guard will deploy into Washington, D.C. and the area around the Capitol. A statement from Chief Pentagon spokesman Jonathan Hoffman that the Guard has been mobilized to provide support to federal law enforcement in the district, and then discusses how the acting Secretary of Defense, Chris Miller, has been in contact with congressional leadership and the Army Secretary McCarthy has been working with the D.C. government. That's led, of course, by the mayor. And the statement goes on to say the law enforcement response will be led by the Department of Justice. And Judy, that speaks to fears within the Pentagon until this afternoon, I should say, that the D.C. Guard would be misused. There were a lot of concerns how the D.C. National Guard deployed in June during the George Floyd protests. And so Joint Staff leaders, Pentagon leaders, Army leaders took pains to restrict how the Guard could be deployed. They weren't allowed, as of this morning, to have weapons. They weren't allowed to have any armored vehicles, and they weren't allowed to use any helicopters like they did in June. But again, that was as of this morning. So this is new. This is just in the last hour or so. The D.C. National Guard has been activated. The entire Guard, all 1,100, has been activated because of what's happening at the Capitol, and they will be assisting law enforcement in clearing the Capitol.
Just one more, Nick, in an extraordinary turn of events this afternoon. You have the D.C. National Guard, as you're reporting. Earlier, we had been reporting both Virginia. The Governor Ralph Northam of Virginia said that the Virginia National Guard was going into the district to help at the request of Mayor Bowser. We've had Maryland announcing that its National Guard, state police being made available to try to to restore some calm and peace there at the United States Capitol building, which has been overrun today by protesters, supporters of President Trump, who called on them to come to Washington to protest the election results and in a belief, in his false belief that the election was rigged and stolen from him. So as a result of his pushing and urging, this is what it has led to. There are reports that a number of people have been hospitalized. We know at least one protester apparently was shot. We don't know the condition of that person. There's a reliable report that the person was shot in the neck. We don't know, again, what has happened, but we know it's serious. This situation took a dark turn very quickly after the House and Senate convened to try to begin the formal process of counting the electoral votes. What should have been a routine process has turned into this mayhem that we've been watching unfold all afternoon since about 1:30, 2 o'clock Eastern Time in Washington. My colleague Amna Nawaz has been there on the grounds of the Capitol watching all this happen. Amna, I know there was a report a little while ago there was tear gas that was deployed. Tell us where you are and what you're seeing.
That's right, Judy. We've actually pulled a little further back away from the Capitol because of that tear gas. I'm not sure if you can see or not over my shoulder, but there's a pretty densely packed crowd that's still trying to get into the Capitol. They've been in a confrontation and a lockdown, a standoff with D.C. Capitol Police for quite some time now. That contingent has kind of continued to grow. It's dissipated on other parts of the Capitol outside here, but you might still be able to see there's some gas coming up over the wall on that side. It's unclear to us exactly from where it was deployed, but of course it's very windy, it's very cold out here. It blew up over that hill, and it did have a little bit of effect. Some of that crowd dissipated. We talked to a few protesters as they were leaving, walking away from the area, wiping their eyes. They were very red-eyed and their noses were running. As I know of someone who's experienced tear gas before, that is what happens. So we've pulled a little further away to remain safe. But that crowd is still very much engaged in a confrontation with D.C. Capitol Police. Fritz, I'm not sure if you can pan a little bit that way. Judy, I want to show you, there's still a significant contingent of people on that center stairwell, but even that has thinned out just a bit. So if I were to update people on sort of what's been happening out here, there's definitely fewer protesters. Maybe because of the cold, the tear gas also contributed a little bit, but people are by and large starting to leave some of this location. You'll see some folks walking around behind us as well. There's now many more heavily armed guards, law enforcement officials, some who we saw with emergency response vests on, who have taken up a position outside the perimeter and seem to be part of that line now holding people back. There's a handful of D.C. Capitol Police who have been here from the beginning who are still in those same positions. But again, fewer protesters now engaged in direct confrontation, now down to sort of a smaller, hardcore contingent that remain screaming and yelling and waving flags and chanting in that confrontation with law enforcement. We have not yet seen any significant arrival of National Guard troops or any other reinforcement troops. We're hearing sirens and we see cars pull up every now and again. But I have to tell you, from here, Judy, we haven't seen a significant increase in that kind of heavier law enforcement or official presence. We'll let you know as we do, but maybe they're hoping that sort of over time, as the cold overtakes people and the tear gas is deployed, that the crowd will continue to thin out a little bit more. Tensions seem to have gone down just a little bit, but we'll come back to you as we know more. Judy?
All right, Amna, thank you from outside the Capitol. And now to Joe Biden speaking to the press in Wilmington, Delaware.
Watching what I've been watching. At this hour, our democracy is under an unprecedented assault, unlike anything we've seen in modern times. An assault on the citadel of liberty, the Capitol itself. An assault on the people's representatives and the Capitol Hill Police, sworn to protect them, and the public servants who work at the heart of our republic. An assault on the rule of law like few times we've ever seen it. An assault on the most sacred of American undertakings, the doing of the people's business. Let me be very clear. The scenes of chaos at the Capitol do not reflect a true America, do not represent who we are. What we're seeing are a small number of extremists dedicated to lawlessness. This is not dissent. It's disorder. It's chaos. It borders on sedition. And it must end now. I call on this mob to pull back and allow the work of democracy to go forward. You've heard me say before in different contexts, the words of a president matter, no matter how good or bad that president is. At their best, the words of a president can inspire. At their worst, they can incite. And therefore, I call on President Trump to go on national television now to fulfill his oath and defend the Constitution and demand an end to this siege, to storm the Capitol, to smash windows, to occupy offices, the floor of the United States Senate, rummaging through desks, on the Capitol, on the House of Representatives, threatening the safety of duly elected officials. It's not protest, it's insurrection. The world's watching. Like so many other Americans, I am genuinely shocked and saddened that our nation, so long the beacon of light and hope for democracy, has come to such a dark moment. Through war and strife, America's endured much. And we will endure here, and we will prevail again, and will prevail now. The work of the moment and the work of the next 4 years must be the restoration of democracy, of decency, honor, respect, the rule of law, just plain, simple decency. The renewal of a politics that's about solving problems, looking out for one another, not stoking the flames of hate and chaos. As I said, America is about honor, decency, respect, tolerance. That's who we are. That's who we've always been. The certification of the Electoral College vote is supposed to be a sacred ritual, which we affirm. The purpose is to affirm the majesty of American democracy. But today's reminder, a painful one, that democracy is fragile, and to preserve it requires people of goodwill, leaders with the courage to stand up, who are devoted not to the pursuit of power, or the personal interest pursuits of their own selfish interest at any cost, but of the common good. Think what our children watching television are thinking. Think what the rest of the world is looking at. For nearly 2.5 centuries, we, the people, in search of a more perfect union, have kept our eyes on that common good. America is so much better than what we've seen today. Watching the scenes from the Capitol, I was reminded, as I prepared other speeches in the past, I was reminded of the words of Abraham Lincoln in his annual message to Congress, whose work has today been interrupted by chaos. Here's what Lincoln said. He said, "We shall nobly save or merely lose the last best hope on earth." Went on to say, "The way is plain, peaceful, generous, just. A way which, if followed, the world will forever applaud and God must forever bless. The way is plain here, too. That's who we are. It's the way of democracy, of respect, of decency, of honor, and commitment as patriots to this nation. Notwithstanding what I saw today and we're seeing today, I remain optimistic about the incredible opportunities. There has never been anything we can't do when we do it together. And this god-awful display today is bringing home to every Republican and Democrat and Independent in the nation that we must step up. This is the United States of America. There's never, ever, 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 ever been a thing we've tried to do that we've done it together. We've not been able to do it. So, President Trump, step up. May God bless America. May God protect our troops and all those folks at the Capitol who are trying to preserve order. Thank you, and I'm sorry to have kept you waiting.
Joe Biden talking to the press there in Wilmington, Delaware. The president-elect calling on President Trump to speak on national television to order his supporters to leave the Capitol. We heard Joe Biden describe what he called disorder and chaos at the Capitol. He said this borders on sedition. It must end. I call on this mob, I'm reading Joe Biden's words, to pull back. And he went on to speak about the words of a president matter, to cite the many ways President Trump has called on his supporters to challenge the election results. He spoke about the need now for Americans to come together. He said the work that we're going to have to do in coming weeks and months will be to bring the country together. I'm very much condensing what the president-elect had to say, but the most newsworthy was his calling on President Trump to go on national television and urge his supporters to leave the Capitol. We know that there were reports before Biden spoke from other news organizations that President Trump had been asked by Republican leaders as well as Democratic leaders to urge people to leave the Capitol. He was refusing to go on television to do that. He was declining. At least that is according to other reports. Right now, our own reporters, our own Lisa Desjardins, Amna Nawaz, have been reporting from the Capitol grounds. We are waiting to see evidence of either National Guard, state patrols, state police, for some evidence that they are showing up at the Capitol to reinforce the Capitol Police, where they were clearly under-prepared, under-secured, were not ready for the show of force on the part of these protesters who came in force in large numbers, determined to breach the Capitol, to breach the perimeter, to go in, to knock down the doors, to break windows, to break glass, to get inside, to go into the Senate chamber, into the House chamber. Here we have, this is a quick look at the House chamber. We were told that protesters were inside. They were also told that House members are trying to find different places to stay safe in the Capitol building. Lisa Desjardins has reported for us that the members of the Senate were in one location. We don't know, of course, what that location is, but we were told they were staying safe, being kept safe in one location. But we're trying to follow sources of information from many different directions. We've just listened to Joe Biden calling on President Trump to go before the American people, to go on national television, to urge his supporters to leave the Capitol, to pull back. And Biden himself called on these protesters to leave the Capitol. He said, and I'm quoting here, he said what they are doing borders on sedition. He called it disorder, even chaos. He said they do not represent who we are as an American people. They are a small number of extremists. And he went on to call them, he said, "I call on this mob to pull back." And he described the words of the president, clearly holding President Trump responsible for what has happened today at the Capitol. These are live pictures you're looking at from the Capitol grounds. We know that tear gas was deployed a little earlier, maybe 15, 20, 30 minutes ago, in an effort to disperse the crowd, but some of them, a number of them, are still there as dark descends on the capital city. We know that it's about 30-some degrees with some pretty strong winds today. It's not a pleasant day to be outdoors, but this is a determined group. I just want to share some news on the Georgia Senate race. A number of news organizations, not the Associated Press, which is what the NewsHour, we are allied with the Associated Press in their call, but other news organizations are saying that Jon Ossoff, they're declaring him the winner in Georgia, but we are not ready. We're waiting to see what the Associated Press does. Yamiche Alcindor has been at the White House for us all day following events there. Yamiche, what are you learning?
What I'm learning is that there are reports that President Trump may be releasing at some point a taped statement. This comes after both Democrats and Republicans, and now Vice President-elect Joe Biden, have called on him to come to a camera to call off these protesters who have broken into the Capitol. We heard President-elect Biden say something that so far President Trump himself has not said, and that is telling these protesters to go home, saying that this is not protest, it looks like insurrection. He also said that this is not democracy and that the president needs to, quote, step up. So this is the president responding to that in some ways. There are a lot of critics of the president who say this is all really all because of the president and his rhetoric, his continuing to beat the drum of disinformation. So what we see is President-elect Biden saying, in this moment, President Trump, you need to step up and be presidential. We'll wait to see what the president says in that taped video address, because the president has in the past in these video addresses continued to talk about disinformation, continued to talk about debunked claims. He's used these taped videos to try to really just continue to spread things that are simply not true and to not take really hard questions from reporters in this moment where the nation is looking for a leader to say something about what's going on.
And we know, Yamiche, as you're reporting, the president has apparently taped a message that is going to be released shortly. We will, of course, share that as soon as we see it. I'm told, okay, maybe this is it. It's a 2-minute statement. It's on Twitter. It was just released as of about 2 minutes ago. As soon as we can share that with you, we will. I'm told he is calling for calm. He's calling for calm.
I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election.
He goes on, let's see, maybe we have the statement here. I hear the president's voice, so maybe someone has the statement. I can see it on Twitter, but I'm not able to share it with you. I'm told the president says the election was stolen. He continues to insist the election was stolen, but he is calling for calm. So it remains to be seen whether this short statement by the president will have the desired effect of getting people to leave the Capitol, because the president clings to this completely unfounded and baseless belief that the election was stolen from him and that he actually won. He's said on several occasions he won by millions of votes or hundreds of thousands of votes in a number of states, which is not true. But as soon as we can get the president's statement, we will share that with you. The picture I'm looking at of the president, he's standing, it looks like in the Rose Garden, in front of the Rose Garden. It's a picture that is shot with him standing there, and I could show it to you on my smartphone, but it's probably not the best way to share video. But in essence, the president is now speaking out to these protesters at the Capitol, asking them to leave, but still saying that the election was stolen from him, that it was illegitimate. Another piece of news, the Associated Press has now joined other news organizations in saying that Jon Ossoff, the 33-year-old business entrepreneur, is the winner in the Senate race in Georgia. That's the second race that was in a runoff. He was running against David Perdue, who had served for one term Republican. Jon Ossoff has defeated David Perdue by a margin, I believe, of 0.6%, which is above the 0.5% under which the candidates, voters can ask for an automatic recount. So that appears to be outside the 0.5%, 0.5% margin that would trigger or set off an automatic recount. So that is a big win for the Democrats. For the Democrats to have won now two, not one, but two Senate seats in the state of Georgia is simply stunning. Another piece of stunning news on this already very news-crammed day that we're all living through and watching. The other race, of course, won by the Reverend Raphael Warnock, who was challenging the incumbent Republican Kelly Loeffler, who had been appointed to that seat just a year ago by the Republican governor, Brian Kemp, after the former Senator Johnny Isakson stepped down because of illness. Governor Kemp appointed Kelly Loeffler, a Republican, in the belief that she would appeal to moderates in the state of Georgia. She, as it turned out, became a huge supporter of President Trump. She's espoused his false claims that the election was stolen from him. She is expected to be one of the members of the Senate who object to the, or the senator who objects to the electoral vote count in the state of Georgia. That was supposed to happen this afternoon. Of course, all that has been put on hold by the protests that we've seen, that we've been covering, the takeover of the Capitol, or I should say, the breach of the Capitol by President Trump's supporters, and a completely unexpected turn of events, violent turn of events that has led to the shooting of at least one protester, 6 people hospitalized. I've also seen reports in the last few minutes that some uniformed police have been injured, uniformed officers, that is, have been injured, and we're waiting to find out more. Lisa Desjardins, do you have something new for us from inside the Capitol complex?
Yes, a few things, Judy. Take off my mask because there's no one near me, and it took me this long to realize that. But I can report that a large number of U.S. senators are now sheltering in place in a secure location. I'm not going to give that location. I know what that location is. On this side of the Capitol, on the House side, I've seen Capitol Police seem to be going through the building, checking for members of Congress. I assume that they are going to offer them the chance to also go to a secure location. But I didn't want to get in their way. I didn't follow them. I didn't ask them questions. But they have been going door by door looking for members of Congress to assess their safety and to deal with that. I can also tell you I've been speaking with Majority Leader of the House, Steny Hoyer's office. Everyone honestly was uprooted from their normal workplaces. I think right now, many staffers who are important in the operation of Congress are just now sort of getting back on their phones, getting in a position where they and their bosses can figure out the steps in governing that come next. And Hoyer's office tells me that they don't know when this session will reconvene, and that they will let us know as soon as they do. But that's no surprise. I also have been told that Hoyer himself is also in a safe location, as you've been reporting for the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. Having covered Congress for a long time, you mentioned Senator Loeffler and how she has planned to object to the Georgia vote. It is going to be a real question, I think, in my mind, if that plan to object to this election continues after the violence that we've seen and that these members themselves have faced. We have been getting reports now. Journalists are scattered all around the Capitol. We're in close touch with each other, trying to keep in touch with who we're talking to. And one of the reports I got is from an interview with Representative Mike Kelly of Pennsylvania. He is one of the people, he's a Republican, one of the people who was objecting. Oh, it looks like my phone can't bring it up now. But when he was asked what he thought led to this, whether he was concerned about the rhetoric from the president led to this, the president who vigorously defends. Instead, he raised something that I think we need to keep our eyes open for. He talked about the media as being the one that stoked this fire, the media as the one to blame, essentially, for the violence that we saw today. So that is something that we see from the right and from at least one of President Trump's allies here in the Capitol, who himself has been affected by this violence today.
So Lisa, what does that tell you, the fact that you have one of the president's supporters saying that?
You know, it tells me that at least Representative Kelly is digging in on the same messages he's had and has spoken for years, and is not yet considering any other possibility for the state of affairs in this country. And I think that's one reason we're at this point, is because both sides, but certainly the president, has been a leader in the idea that if you think you're right, you can believe that you are right, and you can be right. And you don't need to consider arguments that undermine what you believe is the truth. And so I think, at least now, and it's still very soon, we're still in the middle of this, at least now that is one of the president's supporters who's not willing to think more broadly about the underlying causes of what happened here at the Capitol.
Which is a good reason, Lisa, to wonder how this all is going to be resolved, because you have so many people who continue to be loyal to the president, continue to stand by him, and these false allegations, the aggrievement that the president has championed for now weeks and weeks and weeks, and it's now led to what's happened today.
Right.
But you're right about Kelly Loeffler, the senator from Georgia, who's been defeated in her bid for election. Is she going to be able to stand there and object after we've seen what happened? I do have a verbatim now, Lisa, of what the president said in his video message that was tweeted out. I'm going to read this. This is from my colleague Dan Cooney at the NewsHour. He says, I know, this is directed to his supporters, I know your pain, I know your hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. This is the president speaking. It was a landslide election and everyone knows it, especially the other side, but you have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order. We don't want anybody hurt. Of course, people have already been hurt. Those are my words. It's a very tough period of time. There's never been a time like this where such a thing happened, where they could take it away from all of us, from me, from you, from our country. This was a fraudulent election, which is not true. But he says, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace, so go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happened. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel, but go home and go home in peace. So the president tweeted that about 10 minutes ago, give or take, and presumably that's being shared with his supporters. But whether that will lead them to stand down, you just heard Lisa Desjardins describing what one congressman who's a big supporter of the president is telling her. He's not standing down. He's not backing down. They are going to continue to protest the electoral vote results. They're going to continue to question. They're going to continue to believe that this election was fraudulent, that it was stolen, which is going to build, it fuels the anger and the disbelief on their part and fuels the division inside the Republican Party. My colleague was just telling me that the president's former big supporter, former White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, has been quoted as saying, or maybe has tweeted himself, to the president, you must stop this, it's gone too far. Words to that effect. So even people who are close to this president, who've worked directly with him, have been big supporters of his, many of them are now telling him he must put this to an end. Kevin McCarthy, who is the House Minority Leader, highest-ranking Republican in the House of Representatives, very loyal to the president, has been supporting him through all these election challenges, saying to the president, you must tell these people to leave. Now, finally, the president has done that, but he's done it, in essence, with one arm behind his back, saying, yes, go home, but you have every right to be aggrieved because the election was stolen from us. And he's repeated that again just in the last few minutes. So it remains to be seen if these supporters of the president will be dissuaded in any way with that sort of mixed message coming from the president. We have a number of reporters who are following these fast-moving developments. Lisa Desjardins has been in the Capitol. Amna Nawaz has been on the Capitol grounds. I've been joined by, of course, by Yamiche Alcindor at the White House. These are some pictures. I don't know whether they are live or earlier today of downtown D.C. live pictures. And I've also been joined by longtime Capitol Hill individuals who worked as staff at the Capitol. And also joining me now is Kathleen Belew. She is a professor at the University of Chicago, a scholar who studies extremist groups. Professor Belew, if you're there and if you can hear me, I think a definition is helpful at this point, because these people who've shown up supporting President Trump, we don't know whether they came from some organized group or whether they just spontaneously left their hometown and made their way to Washington, D.C. because they have fallen into this conspiracy theory or theories that the president has perpetrated. What is your understanding of who they are?
You know, I think we're going to learn much more about who they are in the days and weeks to come. And I think that's a question that we will want to pay very close attention to as this story unfolds. What I would anticipate, based on the recent history of this kind of activism in our country, is that what we're looking at is sort of an amalgam of people who are motivated by conspiracy theorists that they've encountered on social media and elsewhere, people who subscribe to QAnon, to election conspiracy theory, but also sort of run-of-the-mill Trump base members. And we know that some of the people at this protests are more organized than that and belong to white power movement groups and other parts of what we might think of as the militant right. Now that includes groups like the Proud Boys, one leader of whom was just arrested I think yesterday or the day before, and who has sort of been galvanizing more activity around his arrest and sometimes in tension with police. The thing about the Proud Boys that people might remember is that that's the group that came up in one of the presidential campaign debates when President Trump sort of infamously said, "Proud Boys, stand back and stand by." And many people at the time thought of that as sort of a call to arms, because he was not saying stand down, he was saying stand by. Certainly many people in the Proud Boys and further afield in the white power movement heard that as a call to action by our president. And I think the big question today is whether he even does have the power to tell them to stand down. It's not at all clear that this is a groundswell that he commands in the way that people might think.
No, and no question about it. We're not, and as you say, we don't know yet how much of an organized white supremacist or other group is behind what we are seeing today unfold at the Capitol. We know these are people who do support President Trump, who subscribe to his view that the election was stolen from him, at least the ones our reporters have been able to talk to, the ones we've been able to speak with. Lisa Desjardins spoke with one of them who broke in to the Capitol, who told her, "I'm here because I think President Trump won, and the election, that this can't be allowed to stand." And he told her, he said at one point, the time comes when we have to take on the government, or words to that effect. So very strong views, and we see this from time to time in this country, but we haven't seen it to this level where it's actually reached the U.S. Capitol building, and where we see this level of mayhem, if you will. All right, we now have, I'm told, a way to show you the video of President Trump. This is a statement he released about 10 or 15 minutes ago, shot on a video at the White House in the Rose Garden. Let's listen. It's about 2 minutes.
I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order. We don't want anybody hurt. It's a very tough period of time. There's never been a time like this where such a thing happened where they could take it away from all of us, from me, from you, from our country. This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel. But go home and go home in peace.
That's a statement President Trump issued, put out on Twitter just about 10 or 15 minutes ago, urging his supporters, as you heard, to stand down, but still insisting that the election was fraudulent, that it was stolen from him. And so it remains to be seen how people are going to accept it. Lisa Desjardins, my colleague at the Capitol, has shared a couple of comments from some of the Senate Republican objectors, people who were objecting to the counting and of the electoral votes that led to Joe Biden's winning this election. And Lisa, I see you're there with me. I was reading what you were sharing with the rest of us from Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri, is one of the leaders of this group, and also from Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana.
That's right. And let's start with Senator Hawley, because he has been one of the most ardent objectors, one of the leaders of this objector movement. He wrote in a tweet, thank you to the brave law enforcement officials who have put their lives on the line. And then he wrote, the violence must end. Those who attacked police and broke the law must be prosecuted, and Congress must get back to work and finish its job. Hawley himself is a prosecutor. Then Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, who is also an objector, wrote, again, similar theme, the Capitol Police have done an extraordinary job keeping us safe. I'm thankful for their heroism. Then he wrote, I condemn this violent assault on the democratic process and will not be intimidated by a mob that confuses chaos and destruction with strength and wisdom. I'll continue to work for Louisiana. And Kennedy's statement is so interesting to me, Judy, because those are words that we have seen conservatives use when talking about progressives, when talking about liberals, calling them a mob. Instead, this is something that Kennedy, who himself is a Trump supporter, is using to label the protesters who ransacked this Capitol in the name of his president. He called them again, and a mob that confuses chaos and destruction with strength and wisdom. So I'm eager to ask him what he thinks of the president's words that this mob, as he calls it, has been invoking. And one other thing, Judy, you were talking about when I was talking to protesters earlier, there were several that I spoke to, not as on the show, but in between, when you were talking to other guests. And I think you said a word hours ago that really struck me as getting to the core of how some of these protesters were acting inside the Capitol. They were casual, and they had a sense of propriety about being here that was startling. And I sort of had to just get over the fact that they felt it was completely not only possible, but that it was their right to be doing what they were doing. And they were very laid back about it. Cavalier, some of them nonchalant. You could see in their eyes there was an intensity, but as they were walking around, they were just sort of curious, kind of lackadaisical, some of them. And it was startling compared to their actions. Their actions and their attitudes inside the Capitol were hard for me to really fathom.
It's such a good point, Lisa, and we have yet to understand, of course, what motivates each and every one of these individuals who did what they did, who came into the Capitol, who've done damage, who have clearly taken part in activities that have led to people being injured. We know that one person was shot. We're waiting to find out their condition. A total of 6 people went to the hospital. We know that several law enforcement officers have been injured. We don't know the details of any of that, but this took a very dark turn, and whatever their motivation was, and no matter how, as you point out, whether it's casual or cavalier, they may act or be about what's going on. it has very serious consequences. And so when you read the words of either Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, and I'm repeating it again, condemning this violent assault on the democratic process and calling it a mob that confuses chaos and destruction with strength and wisdom, or whether you quote, as you did, Josh Hawley, the freshman senator from Missouri, who's been one of the ringleaders or one of the leaders of this effort to object to the election results, saying the violence must end, those who attacked police and broke the law must be prosecuted. So you do have now these voices rising up, even from among the president's most loyal supporters, calling on the protesters to stop. But I have to say, Lisa, it has to be difficult for these, Americans, and these are Americans. These are not foreign terrorists who come into our country, where we've spent so much time focusing on foreign interference in our country. These are Americans who are, on the one hand, holding the idea in their minds that this election was stolen, but on the other hand, they're being told to stand down and to let it, just to let things go forward. And that's a very difficult concept for people. It is for all of us. But the president is continuing to say that. He's continuing to say the election was stolen from us. It was stolen from me. It was stolen from you. The democracy's been attacked. And yet, I'm asking you to go home in peace.
I was going to say, Judy, I think what I saw, and I'm still processing what I saw, obviously, I'm now sort of I'm understanding that in some ways it was a physical manifestation of what's been intangible for so long. Something like an election is intangible. It's an idea, it's a process. And there has been an idea for so many of the president's supporters that the election was stolen. They believed this idea. They wanted it to be true. In their minds, they made it true. So then I saw physically here something that's connected but seems like a different topic. People entering the Capitol, breaking through the glass door, bulletproof glass, I think it was, of the U.S. Capitol, pushing down police officers, and then minutes later telling me they didn't believe in violence and that they were not violent. And so I'm now realizing there's something going on with this disconnect of you can believe whatever truth you want to and make it true. And it's more than that. It is a disconnect with reality, and it is a choice to not be responsible for anything negative at all. And to put that responsibility on others. You are not responsible for anything. You can do whatever you want. And that's what we saw here in the U.S. Capitol. You can make up whatever reasons you want, but do whatever you want and believe whatever you want. And I think that is what I heard and felt from these protesters. It was sort of a physical manifestation of these years of completely disregarding some aspects of reality. And today it was disregarding the reality of what they themselves were doing to their own country.
Yeah, it's clearly a disconnect. I think the way you describe it, Lisa, is apt. It's a disconnect between, again, holding the idea that the election was fraudulent, which we know it was not. The election was carried out. It's been multiple courts have ruled the election in state after state after state. They've upheld that it was done in a legitimate and fair and legal manner. But despite that, these people are being told it wasn't. And what are they going to do with that information? Just swallow it and go on? I mean, what are they going to do? That's a loaded piece of information to carry around. Again, even though there's no evidence to back it up, when you're being told that by the most powerful person on the planet, by the President of the United States, and you're inclined to believe it, what do you do with that information? By the way, I've just seen that Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar says she's drawing up articles of impeachment against President Trump. There have been other references today to other members saying the president, quote, should be impeached. Wow. He only has, 14 days left in office. It's highly unlikely something like that's going to to be
Judy, I'll
carried
tell
out.
you,
But
one
go
quick
ahead.
thing about that, articles of impeachment, that's a privileged motion. That does not have to go through the committee process. When Congress reconvenes, and I expect it to reconvene before President Trump leaves office, she can bring that to the House floor. It is within her right as a lone congressman. We've seen other congressmen in the past, Al Green, famously bring impeachment resolutions. So while Democrats as a whole and leaders don't have an appetite for an impeachment debate right now because Trump's leaving, she can raise that. And if she is determined to do it, we will probably see a vote on that on the House floor.
But that wouldn't be before they finish with the task that is immediately before them,
No.
which is counting these electoral votes, right? I mean, that takes precedence over everything.
That's right.
Although
Currently,
that's on. Go ahead.
currently they are in a joint session of Congress that has split into the separate House and Senate debates. That is one of the most highest kind of privileged sorts of process that the Capitol has. So that joint session, Congress actually has to vote to adjourn the joint session. It has to complete the business of the joint session. It has to finish the 2020 election, which, by the way, I haven't been on Twitter, but if I was, I would say I really thought the 2020 election was going to end perhaps before midnight tonight, but we don't know when Congress will be able to finally end it, hopefully in hours, but Congress, that is their next task. That is what they will return to when they reconvene.
Lisa Desjardins at the Capitol. We're going to go now to D.C., Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, who's holding a press conference. Let's hear what she says.
But nothing like ridiculous.
Working to get her audio. She's clearly responding. This is the chief of police who's just stepped up
Can I
to the
power down,
microphone.
guys?
We're trying. Let's see if we can get that audio for you. Okay, we're working to get that, and we will go to Mayor Bowser and the police chief in Washington, D.C. As soon as we possibly can.
Madison Avenue Northwest and Constitution Avenue Northwest. As the demonstrators approached the United States Capitol grounds, there was a noticeable change in their demeanor. They breached the fencing along the U.S. Capitol grounds and confronted police lines surrounding the building. MPD was requested by the United States Capitol Police to provide assistance with crowd management, and due to the violent behavior towards the police officers there and their intent on gaining access to the Capitol, a riot was declared. It was clear that the crowd was intent on causing harm to our officers by deploying chemical irritants on police to force entry into the United States Capitol building. As you are aware, they were able to gain access to the Capitol building, and I can confirm that one civilian was reported to have sustained a gunshot wound inside of the Capitol. Details of the shooting are not immediately available, and the situation remains under investigation. The Metropolitan Police Department will be taking the lead on that investigation. MPD continues to provide personnel resources and assistance on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol and has requested the assistance of law enforcement partners through a previously in place mutual aid agreement. As you heard from the mayor, a 6 p.m. curfew has been put in place tonight and will be in effect until 6 a.m. tomorrow, January 7th. We are advising everyone that is not engaged in essential activity to get off the streets and adhere to the curfew. If you are found to be in violation of the curfew, police will be required to take action. Again, I want to reiterate and make it clear, please abide by the curfew that the mayor has set in place, or people will be subject to arrest. Lastly, I know that many of you are familiar with the Metropolitan Police Department. Understand that there is no better agency in the country to handle First Amendment events. They happen on a regular basis here in our city. However, today's events were not representation of peaceful protests. Today, what we witnessed was unlawful, riotous behavior. And people that come to our city engaged in unlawful behavior will be held accountable. We can take any questions that you may have after the Secretary has a chance to speak.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser, Chief Conte.
We've been listening to the police chief in Washington, D.C. You can see you listen to him describing the riot, he called it, that broke out at the U.S. Capitol today. What started out as a peaceful protest people showing up to support President Trump and his false allegation that the election was rigged, stolen from him, turned into a riot. People broke into the Capitol. There have been injuries. At least one person was shot. We're waiting to find out more. Another striking development just now, the National Association of Manufacturers. This is a group that represents, as the title suggests, American manufacturers across the country, typically a group that would support Republicans. They've issued a statement calling on Vice President Pence, and I quote, to seriously consider working with the cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment. That is the amendment of the Constitution which calls for the removal of the President of the United States. And they say to do this, quote, to preserve democracy. This is, a number of things we've said today are remarkable. This is just one more in a string of events today that has jaws dropping, eyes popping in reaction to what's happened today. You had the President of the United States speaking to his supporters for an hour. They marched to the Capitol. They took over. They broke into the building. It just had their run of the place. And I'm reading the statement from the their acronym is NAM, National Association of Manufacturers. This is a large group. It represents the companies that make things, manufacturers. They are calling on the Vice President of the United States to seriously consider working with the cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove the president from office in order to preserve democracy. It's about as stark as you can get when you have a statement like this from a very respected, stable, long-time organization that is Republican-leaning, if anything, in its beliefs, in its philosophy. So again, one more, and we are reporting to you on this as we're reporting on National Guard, state police coming in from Maryland, coming in from Virginia, being invoked, the National Guard in D.C., whereas our Nick Schifrin reported earlier there was a reluctance to call up the D.C. National Guard because of the position they had been put in back in the summertime when President Trump, in effect, used the National Guard to put down peaceful protesters who were protesting the death of George Floyd. That was the event where the president stood in front of a church and held up a Bible, and we remember that incident well. So one surprising turn of events after another. Yamiche Alcindor is reporting on all this at the White House. Yamiche, it's now dark there. You've been standing by for hours as the events have transpired one after another.
That's right. And what we've seen from the president is him trying to urge calm while also continuing to double down on the false information that got us to this moment. What's remarkable about that video that the president put out is that he spends as much time, if not more time, continuing to say things that are not true, continuing to say that he won the election, that it was stolen from him, things that we know aren't true. And then he goes on to say, I also understand your pain. In some ways, critics would say feeding into the sense of entitlement that Lisa witnessed at the Capitol when you saw people breaking in and, as she said, cavalierly walking around the building as if they weren't breaking the law. What you see in the president here in this moment that is possibly the most important moment of his presidency, is a president that is continuing to be consumed with the issue of staying in power, continuing to be consumed with his own political failings. This is a president who is now, of course, losing people that were close to him, including, I think, many Republicans who in some ways are not already saying publicly, are whispering what that statement is saying from that manufacturing group, saying that maybe 14 days is too long for a president who would continue to say that the election was stolen even after seeing someone be shot in the Capitol of the United States. 2 weeks is a long time, Judy. This has all happened, as you know, in one day. There are a lot of people that I'm talking to now, even allies of the president, who are frankly scared, worried about what the president might do next. The president, in some ways, said that he was empathetic with these protesters, with these people who have broken the law, who have terrorized and scared so many people. He empathized with them, saying, I understand your pain. And the president wasn't as pointed as Vice President Pence or President-elect Biden in this moment that calls for leadership.
And I'm reading, Yamiche, in conjunction with all that you're saying, a CNN reporter, Jim Acosta, who covers the White House along with you, saying that a source close to the White House who's in touch with some of the rioters at the Capitol said it's the goal of those involved to stay inside the Capitol through the night. So if that's the case, then we can expect to see some confrontation, because we know that there are more law enforcement who are moving into the Capitol in an attempt to remove them from the building, to restore calm, to restore order, so that the Congress can go back to work. If this is true, and if they are saying we plan to stay, then we can expect some kind of confrontation. We certainly hope that doesn't happen. We certainly hope there's no more violence than there's already been. We certainly would hope for a peaceful resolution. But this is a disturbing bit of information for us to have. And Yamiche, your other point. Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Yamiche.
I would just add that, from my understanding, it is that protesters do not want that counting by Congress to go on, and as a result, their goal is to try to stay in the Capitol, is to try to hold out, is to try to see if they can get something done and try to upend even more the process. So it is my understanding that these protesters are going to have to be taken out of the Capitol. Some of them may leave when they hear the president say go home, but many of them may see that as the president just doing what people want him to do, because he has said so many times, other times, that people should fight, people should not concede.
Well, and that was his message to them today, was it not? Earlier today, he was urging his Vice President, Mike Pence, to put a stop to this counting. He doesn't want this process to go forward. So there's very much a mixed message going on here. On the one hand, he's saying the election was rigged in his view, and he wants the process to stop. On the other hand, he's saying go home. So how are they to read this?
It's that mixed messaging that is really troubling tonight, as we realize that the president is not going to stop questioning the results of the election, is not going to finally say, I lost the election. The president at one point said that he was a sore loser, said that it was hard for him to lose. But this, in some ways, has gone so much farther than even people close to President Trump thought it would go. So many weeks when I talked to people, they said, well, the president is really just processing. He's embarrassed. He's hurt. He's going to come around. And now what we see is a president who is not able to come around, who is not able to process this loss. And we're a country where we depend on presidents in particular to process their losses and move on if they have to. That's the way that democracy survives in America, survives in this great experiment that and survives in a place where we export democracy to other countries. So in this way, what we see is a president who is wanting to at least say and condemn violence, but cannot at all bring himself to say, this needs to end, this election is over, let's go on. It just is not part of what he's going to do. There's no sense among people who are close to him that he's going to ever get to the point where he can say, you know what, this has gone too far. Let's all go home, including myself. Let me leave the White House here. So that's why you see this talk that 14 days might not be a time period that the president can be responsible with.
Which is why we are seeing this stunning statement from the National Association of Manufacturers, this large organization representing, as we said, the major companies in this country, the manufacturers, typically Republican sympathetic organization, saying no matter what party's in charge, it's time for the vice president to talk to the cabinet about removing the president from office. And as you say, Yamiche, it is 14 days from the time that Joe Biden would step in, would be inaugurated. The fact that people are not even prepared to wait 14 days, 2 weeks, is simply head spinning, stunning, and you're hearing it from others. You're reading. You might expect Democrats to be calling for impeachment, but the fact that Republicans are now concerned and stepping in and saying, although this is not a Republican organization, they tend to support Republicans on a number of issues. I'm now joined, Yamiche, I'm going to turn to Republican Congressman Ron Estes of Kansas. He had planned to object to today's electoral vote count. Congressman, tell me where you are right now and what is your take on what's been happening?
So I had just left the floor when just before the protesters stormed into the Capitol building, and so we're in office buildings now. And so we're safe and secure, both myself as well as the staff members. And so we're looking to see, I mean, I have complete confidence in the Capitol Police and law enforcement in helping make sure that we go through and they clear out the Capitol building and we get back to the business that we need to do. I mean, this has been inappropriate completely, that, you know, protesting is appropriate. Free speech is appropriate in terms of what we say, but having violence and destruction is not appropriate at all.
Congressman, are you still planning to object to the electoral vote?
So the process today on January 6th is that we as Congress has a responsibility to certify the electors. And based on what's in the Constitution is that the state legislators should have the responsibility to determine how those electors are selected. And in several of these states, that didn't happen. Either it was a judge or it was an election official chose to do that. And that's not the way the Constitution was set up. That's not what's supposed to be done. I mean, we're a country that, you know, based on the rule of law. And so that was what the whole objection process was about. There were a lot of folks who, on the Republican side as well, who some were objecting and some weren't, because this is a very serious discussion. We don't want Congress picking the president. That's not appropriate at all. We don't want judges picking the president. The judicial branch is not supposed to do that. And so this was a process. We should have been able to go through that process peacefully, because that's what we've done for the last 240 years in our country, is have peaceful protest and peaceful transition of government.
But President Trump is the one, Congressman Estes, who urged his supporters to come to Washington. He urged them not to allow this process to go forward. He's the one who is saying that this process should be stopped, that it should not go forward, that his votes, that the electoral vote count should stop, that it should go back to the states, period, and the election should be overturned. Are you supporting him in that belief?
So there have been several protests since the election. I expected this protest to be like that, to be peaceful in terms of that process. I was somewhat surprised today that it did turn violent, because that hadn't been the aspect of what had happened in any of the previous ones. I do understand frustration on people's parts, but it's not appropriate for individuals. I don't condone violence that they've done, and don't support them at all in terms of storming our Capitol and trying to disrupt the process that's set up in the laws of our country and that we should follow.
What responsibility do you think President Trump has for sending the message, though, that this election should not be accepted, and that his supporters should do whatever they can, anything they can, in order to stand in the way of Joe Biden becoming president?
So I think you have to look at and hold accountable those individuals that committed these acts of violence. It's not appropriate at all for them to do that, and those are the folks that need to be held accountable for doing that. I support our Capitol Police and the law enforcement who've actually done an admirable job looking out to secure the Capitol building and make sure that we have a minimum amount of issues with individuals. But even though it's part of our country's history to have free speech and to have the ability to protest, this violence is not appropriate, and individuals should not have done that.
But do you think President Trump bears some responsibility, if not a great deal of responsibility, for what's happened?
I think when you have a crowd that gets together conducting a protest, you're at risk anytime that there can be violence that comes out of that. I mean, we saw it earlier last year with all of the Antifa protests, and we saw the violence in Seattle and in Wisconsin, and so that's an individual. We need to hold those individuals that commit that responsible, and knowing that when you do have a crowd, that is a risk. And that's one of the reasons why, you know, the Capitol Police and law enforcement are always at the ready when you go through the process of having a protest like that at the beginning maybe start out peaceful, but then has the risk of turning violent.
Do you think the president should have urged his supporters to come to Washington today for protests?
Well, I think protesting is part of our country's history, and we can't limit free speech through that. We can't limit people's right to protest about aspects, but it should be done peacefully. It should be done within the rule of law, and that's the whole point of what this process was today, was to follow the rule of law. And everybody should be responsible to do that, and should be responsible to encourage folks to follow that rule of law.
Do you know anyone who was part of today's protests?
I don't know any of those individuals that were out there storming in the Capitol. I do know there's different discussions of different folks that were planning to come to the rally earlier, but I don't know specifically anybody that's at the Capitol now.
And Congressman, just quickly back on your point about objecting to the results, and I hear what you're saying about the state legislatures are supposed to have more oversight over how electors are chosen. But as you know, in all the 50 states and the District of Columbia, there were numerous legal challenges to what happened, and not a single court has upheld anything that would overturn any of these results. So there's a huge question mark about what exactly is the violation that happened, that took place, that you believe makes this election illegitimate. I gather you're saying the election result is illegitimate?
No, I think what you saw from several of the court rulings was that there wasn't standing, particularly like the Texas lawsuit, that the Attorney General in Texas didn't have standing to dictate to Pennsylvania how Pennsylvania should select their electors. So it wasn't that the courts ruled on the merits of whether there was decisions.
No, they
made.
also said there was no evidence. They ruled in a number of cases that there was no evidence.
That were different than what the state legislature had said, but it was one of those things where, the most part, there were several of the court cases. It was that there was a process identified that come on January 6th, and that's what we were following through here today.
All right. Well, we are going to leave it there. Representative Ron Estes of Kansas, who's one of the objectors in this electoral vote counting process. Congressman Estes, thank you very much, and we're so glad that you were able to stay safe today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, and we need to get back to making sure that we follow the rule of law and move forward with our country and continue this electoral process here.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. And I want to turn now to one of our congressional veterans, we're calling them, individuals who've worked on part of the staff on Capitol Hill for a number of years. John Hart worked for Republican, the late Republican Senator Coburn, who, John, you worked for him both. I'm in the House and in the Senate, John Hart. But you've been listening to a Republican congressman from Kansas just now sort of square the circle of trying to explain how it's possible to object to the election, to the electoral votes, but also say it's time to move on.
Right. I think Congressman Estes is a very principled and smart guy from Kansas, a very decent person. And I think what he's articulated is that, look, there are instances all over the country where state legislators did not have the final say in how the election was administered. And there's a legitimate constitutional argument between those who say the state legislator should have total control and those who say actually the state legislator merely sets the parameters, but secretaries of state and other boards can make those determinations as to how the elections are actually executed. So I think what we would have learned today had the protest not happened in the way it did, and I think we'll still learn, is that there is a lot of ambiguity written into the Constitution about how Congress can provide oversight, should Congress provide oversight to state election boards, to state legislatures rather. And to me, the only intellectually honest way to actually change anything is to do it through a constitutional amendment. So there may be takeaways where there might be an agreement to, for example, look at how we draw congressional districts. You can broaden the aperture beyond just election rules to look at how do we decide districts and how do we have modern elections in the internet age in ways that are transparent and fair. Could we simply vote through our phone? Are there ways to do it online? If we can pay our taxes online, why can't we vote? Are there simpler ways to have free and fair and open elections, ways that can prevent fraud that will not create suspicion? And again, I think what's happened is there were 4 years of the resistance on the left that said the president was illegitimately elected. And that has created an enormous amount of suspicion. And I would agree that Trump has amplified that in ways that are unhelpful, but that's part of why we are where we are today.
I don't think we've had 4 years of the kind of the president's illegitimately elected, though, the way the president is protesting what's happened in this election. John, I think it's fair to say people may not have liked the result, but they accepted the result in 2016. Today, what we're hearing is that the president is saying the election was stolen from him, that dead people voted, that caches of piles of votes were thrown in at the last minute, as he said about Georgia yesterday. And there's just no evidence of that. I mean, I know there is this discussion about what state legislatures should have done. That was the question I was asking Congressman Estes a minute ago, and what you're just referring to. But that's different from saying the entire election was fraudulent, which, again, judge after judge, state after state said didn't happen.
Right, and to clarify, that is not at all what I'm saying either. I think what I am imploring the media to do at large is to understand that when there were years and years dedicated to a storyline that the Russians helped elect Donald Trump, that Donald Trump colluded with the Russians, and there was an impeachment process built around that, that then created a fertile ground for Donald Trump to say